Mike stood next to the chair behind the desk and stared at the CCTV monitors. His gaze was locked in the middle one, which provided an exterior view of the building Mike was in. Apparently, flipping the breaker lever had done more than get the interior lights back on, and also tripped whatever switch controlled the outside lights. Staring at the lights on the monitor now, Mike wasn't sure whether seeing an exterior lit up would have encouraged him or disencouraged him from coming inside. The gargish sign was supposed to be welcoming, he was sure, but it was an opposite effect on Mike. Maybe that was because the lights, although on, were constantly flickering, altering and casting a harsh glare and uninviting shadows out from aspiring buildings. Resembling a slumped, sleeping giant on the worn glare and shadows, the building clearly had seen better days. Roof sagging, paint peeling, gutters dangling, the building's windows were boarded up. Even so, the CCTV monitor revealed a lit up, fade red sign that read Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. In a blossom of sputtering spotlight, a cutout of the framed dude himself, the big brown bear Mike had seen in the hallway posters, looked out over the empty parking lot. The bear's full-toothed grin was probably supposed to be shout, "Come on in." Again, it had the opposite effect on Mike. Sighing, Mike looked at the VCR. Ragnar had told Mike to look for the tape in the desktop drawer. Mike reached out and to pull out the drawer open. Sure enough, a VCR tape sat next to him in a few pens. Mike grabbed the tape before he sat in the desk, rolling gravely off his chair. Then he opened the tape of the old VCR. He hit the power button on the TV. A click, a twint, a funk, and a few wavy tracking lights traveled through the TV screen. Static old-timey cartoon music played, and the tracking lights gazed way to a graphic version of Freddy Fazbear and the pizzeria logo. Mike raised an eyebrow at the tiny music, but he leaned back in the chair and put his attention on the TV screen as the logo dissolved into a title, Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria, Security Brief. The cartoon music faded and loud 80s rock music began. Mike watched the tape title break into a gazillion pixels, and the title was replaced by a large restaurant dining room filled with happy family eating, talking, and laughing. A dozen or so little kids played or danced in the aisles between the tables. A merry-faced woman with curly strawberry blonde hair beamed at the camera. Her jolliness would have put Santa to shame. Mike found himself leaning back further, as if he could escape the woman's merriment. The woman had pretty blue eyes and pouty red painted lips that had scratched into the big smile as she sang out, "Welcome to Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria, a magical place for kids and grown-ups alike, a place where fantasy and fun comes to life." The woman flung out her arms, and for a second Mike thought she was going to twirl with glee, but she didn't. Instead, she said, "If you're watching this video, this means you selected as Freddy's newest security guard. Congratulations! We're going to have so much fun together." Mike raised an eyebrow. "We are?" he asked the TV screen. He shook his head as he kept watching. On the TV, the dining room scene and the woman flip-flop away, and then the woman reappeared in front of the packed, briefly lit arcade. The arcade, lined with full-size games, pinball machines, skee-ball machines, as well as a bunch of games Mike didn't recognize, featuring a huge network of plastic towers and tunnels. These crisscrossed over the giant plastic ball pit, even with all-out the bliss-out little kids playing. It was a clear place where any kid's dream playground. The woman began speaking again. "The genius who created Freddy Fazbear Entertainment opened Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria to indulge in his two greatest passions, family fun, and cutting-edge animatronic technology." On the screen, the arcade swirled into a black hole, and another room burst into view. Mike didn't think this room looked like nearly as fun. Stuffed full of metal shelves and work tables, the room had a screen was now filled with what looked like robotic parts. In the center of the room, a receding metal chair was occupied by an unmoving animatronic. It was tough to tell what animatronic was meant to be. Mike could only see some blood for the edge of the expense of the metal endoskeleton, a tangle of wires. A white-coated man Mike guessed was the technician was prodding at the wires with a tool that looked like a cross between a pair of pliers and a pair of snipping shears. The tool was almost evil-looking, sharp and hard. The woman reappeared on the screen, still looking relentlessly happy. She thrilled. "State-of-the-art robotic engineering enables our characters to interact with guests in a truly lifelike fashion, while clearly convolved, rechargeable, illuminated cells give the characters limited range to roam free." The woman rose up with her tippy toes. "Safety first." The screen suddenly went dark, and the woman reappeared. Now she stood in front of the expanse of the faintly red serge curtains. This should be good, Mike muttered. The woman on the screen said in a hype-up tone, "Let's introduce you to the stars of the show. Hit it, guys!" The woman made a sweep gesture with her left arm. The woman in the screen disappeared, and the TV was filled with an image of a hand striking a palm-sized red plastic button. The label above the button read out Showtime. The curtains once again filled the TV screen. The woman was no longer in front of them, and the curtains were starting to part. An inch, 2, 3, and 4. The hems of the curtains fluttered as they moved, and then an image of a screen froze and dissolved into a blur of tracking lights. Mike leaned forward and whacked the side of the small TV. He didn't think it would be any good, but the TV emitted the sound of distorted laughter, and the woman suddenly reappeared on the screen. She now stood in front of the planted pulled-back curtains. She was looking for the right, appearing towards whatever was on the now exposed stage. "Adorable, aren't they?" the woman asked, using a cleatly voice. "These cuddly critters and priority technology brings them to life. Are now your sacred duty to protect, keep them safe, and help ensure that Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria is here to delight, dazzle, and entertain for years to come." The screen went black. Mike stared at the "Seriously?" he asked out loud. The desk chair let out a squeal as Mike leaned forward and pulled the tape from the VCR. He stuck it back at the desk drawer and then shifted his attention to the CCTV monitors. There were 9 of them. Each one was streaming footage of various rooms in the restaurant for some angle of the restaurant's exterior or its surroundings. All the images were black and white, and they were blurry, low resolution. The obscure monochromatic screens remind Mike of sailing shots of old horror movies. Even though the areas appear to be empty, they clearly hint at trouble lurking off-screen. They were supremely creepy. Mike lifted his gaze and looked around the room again. His attention lay on the lone locker. Randomly, his mind was suddenly filled with the image of seeing one of those boys in his school, Bobby, a poor skinny kid who was teased relentlessly, being stuffed in his locker. The little hairs at the back of Mike's arms burst as he looked at the slats at the top of the locker. What exactly was in that thing? Mike tried to dismiss the question, but he knew he shouldn't be able to settle until he satisfied himself with that locker was empty, or that it was at least filled with something big and imminent. Leaving his backpack on the desk next to the TV, Mike got up and walked over to the locker. Hesitant only a second, he reached out and yanked the locker's unsecured lock. The locker door swung open and slapped against the wall of the clank. Mike looked into the locker. His gaze met a bulge eye of a rose-cheeked, grinning little boy. Mike whelped and immediately slammed the locker door shut again. He backed away from the locker and stared at it. His heart felt like it was detonating in his chest. What the hell was that? Mike's brain provided him with a replay of what he'd seen. He'd seen a boy, skinny skin, too colorful face, too much white in the eyes, and most importantly, the boy was very, very puny. Conclusion, it wasn't a real boy. Mike rolled his eyes in his own skinniness. He breathed in and out evenly, and then he stepped forward. This time, Mike pulled the locker door open slowly. Sitting on the locker's table shelf, the boy gazed at Mike particularly. Not a boy, a doll. A doll wore a pinstripe propeller top cap and held with a faintly red balloon. The ball was too short to have mistaken for a real child, unless you got yourself worked into a jump at your own shadow state of high anxiety. "I really need to calm down," Mike said. The boy doll didn't agree, but it didn't disagree either. The boy's grin, however, did make Mike feel like the doll was laughing at him. Mike looked at the doll's bulging eyes. Little worms of unease crawled in Mike's neck. He quickly reached out and turned the doll's head so its face was aiming toward the back of the locker. "There, balloon boy," Mike said. "Laugh at that." Mike dropped his gaze from the doll and inspected the rest of the locker, wanting to be sure it didn't hold any more stackedly toys. Thankfully, it didn't. There were only other things in the locker. One was, great, a flashlight. One of the big black ones that could be used as a weapon if necessary. Mike really hoped it wouldn't be necessary. The second thing in the locker was a Freddy Fazbear branded red security vest. Mike studied the vest for a second, then he shrugged. "Why not?" Mike tugged the vest of the wire hanger. Mike grabbed the flashlight, gave Balloon Boy one last glance. To be honest, he wanted to make sure it was all still turned forward to the back of the locker, and shut the locker door. Stepping over to the desk, he set the flashlight where he was able to grab it quickly if the power went out again. Then, he slipped on the vest. He might as well look the part. Armed now with a lefty flashlight and a determination not to be on edge, Mike decided he would be more comfortable if he explored his surroundings a bit. The office itself didn't feel like much of a safe haven, and so Mike wanted to know what else the building held. He decided to start with the main dining room he's seen in the video. Mike left the office and headed back down the main hall, bypassing all the closed doors, not because he was afraid of what was behind them. Nope, not afraid at all. Mike retraced his steps back to the lobby. As he went, he shone his flashlight every which way. He didn't see much that he hadn't noticed before. Except he did see that the hallway ceiling had intercom speakers, like the ones in the office. He figured they were probably all over the restaurant. When Mike reached the lobby, he turned down the archway. Then he strode through it and looked around. Although the building's power was full on, the carnivorous dining area, it had to be at least 100 feet tall, square, was still filled with puddles of black and gray and the pastel of dirty yellow. Mike looked up and he saw that the yellow came from a moonlight shining through the blank of the dirty skylights. Mike looked around and he saw a light switch on the left and the archway. He took a step towards it, but then he remembered Randall's warning about the electricity system. He didn't want to risk plunging the entire building into pitch black again, so he flicked on his flashlight. As soon as Mike aimed his flashlight in the expanse in front of him, he kind of wished he hadn't turned it on. The scene was bleak. Maybe if Mike hadn't watched the video, he wouldn't have been as put off as a vacant, filthy, deserted room. Mike's mind, however, was filled with the bright, happy scenes from the video. He expected to find a colorful room filled with tables. Instead, he was looking at a wasteland. Only a few tables remained, and they were covered in dust and filthy, torn tablecloths. A few toppled stacks of chairs were scattered around the room. The black and white floor was littered with debris, party hats, party plates, napkins, empty cups. Kicking one of the cups, Mike walked towards the two stages of the opposite side of the room. One of the stages was covered with the oldest version of the red carpets he'd seen in the video. The velveteen on the curtain now was matted, and the red one was faded. Over a smaller stage to the left, a purple curtain with gold stars sagged. Mike recognized it from the poster of the hallway. He sincerely hoped the fox from the poster wasn't lurking behind the curtain. To continue the sudden melancholy of the neglected and forgotten dining room had created, Mike whistled loudly. The sound rang through the room, swirling out away from him and then returning. It reminded him on the way his words had echoed back to him in the lobby. Weird. Mike shook his head, reminding himself he decided not to be spooked. He whistled again, even louder. He started to take a step forward. A loud chatter jerked Mike into a full startle. He sucked up in the gas and snapped his flashlight beam towards the sound. His flashlight rays were aimed at the curtains that covered the stage. What was back there? Was someone else here? Hello? Mike called out. As soon as he threw out the word, he regretted. How many times had he laughed at the character in the movie where they call out, hello? If someone was here, it probably wasn't someone up to any good. And now? Mike had announced his presence and his exact location. Brilliant! Mike kept his flashlight aimed at the curtains. They didn't move. Staying very, very still. Mike listened. He heard nothing. Not even his own breathing. Mike realized he stopped breathing. He started again. Shining his light in the full circle, Mike decided there was a way too many potential hiding spots in the room. Not at least of which is behind the closed curtains. The flashlight and the wimpy moonlight didn't give him even close to an acceptable view of the area around him. Mike turned and strode to the light switch. Using it, it was worth the risk. Mike reached the switch quickly. He flipped it upward. Nothing happened. Mike flicked the switch up, down several times. Click, click, click. No light. Perfect, Mike said. The word toyed with him with the same way his whistle had. Mike decided to keep his mouth closed from now on. For a second, Mike thought about retreating back to the office. But if someone wasn't here, wasn't it his job to find them? I'm not getting paid enough for this, Mike thought. Even so, he stepped away from the light switch. Taking a deep breath, he advanced further into the room. Feeling vulnerable out of the middle of the room, Mike decided to hug the right wall. That wall, he noticed, was covered with a children's drawing. Maybe 100 or more stick figures drawings, not unlike many of the Abbey's masterpieces. Plastered the dining room's wall like wallpaper. yellow and curly, the drawing mother and Mike's past them. Although Mike's flashlight was illuminating the drawings, he gave only them curiosity attention, his focus on the main stage. That was where the sun had came from. Past the drawings, Mike reached a short flick of stairs that led up to the stage. Near the stage, a hand-sized red button was on the wall. It was a button from the video. The Showtime letters above it were faded, barely eligible. If Mike hadn't known what it was, he might not have been able to piece the word together. Mike aimed a flashlight at the button. He shook his head. No way in hell was he going to press the thing. Mike passed by the button. He climbed the step up the stage, making sure to walk far enough in front of the curtains that he was beyond arm's reach of anything that might want to come out from behind them. Mike stepped softly over to the dusty wood stage floor until he reached the middle of the stage where the two sides of the curtains met. He shone his light at the half-inch gap between them. Straightening his posture as if shoulder-like stance would prepare him for whatever he was about to face, Mike reached out and took an edge of the curtain in his left hand. The velvet was crusty beneath his fingertips. Mike pulled the curtain back further. Leading his flashlight, he poked his head between the curtains. When Mike's flashlight beam landed on the first grinner, Big Tooth Mouth, the beam immediately jerked away, then took the light of another massive grin, and another. Stunned and awed by the size of a tooth-filled mouse he was seeing, Mike stirred his light and aimed it to illuminate as wide a view as possible. As soon as he took the whole scene, his awe morphed into dread. Mike immediately stepped back, still clenching the curtains in his left hand, not because he wanted to, but because his fingers had suddenly clamped into the velvet material. He retreated. The curtain came with him, pulling up away from the stage room and opening a wider gap. Mike swept his flashlight left and right, and when he took the light away from what he was seeing, finally dropping the curtain, Mike turned. He didn't bother to head to the stage stairs. He just leaped off the stage and started hot-footing it through the dining room. As Mike ran, his brain provided him with a recap of what he seen, a huge wide eye that hovered above all their earring, grins that had set him scampering away like a bunny rabbit pursued by a hawk. The eyes, bunny rabbits. Had Mike really seen what he thought he'd seen? A chill cascaded through Mike's body like a freezing waterfall. He ran faster. Mike tried to tell himself that his brain was playing tricks on him. He hadn't seen what he thought he'd seen, but he knew he was lying to himself. Just as Mike had dropped the curtains, one set of white eyes, the set that belonged to the big blue bunny, and shifted. It had watched Mike's retreat.